The United States may have changed its mind about starting talks with North Korea. On his way back from the Winter Olympics in South Korea, the US Vice President Mike Pence said Washington is ready to engage. Our correspondent Stephen McDonnell in Seoul has more on how the talks might happen and the behind-the-scenes Olympic diplomacy that's got us here.
Well, if this report in the Washington Post is to be believed, this represents a major shift in approach to North Korea from the Trump administration. Now, on board Air Force Two, what Mike Pence is said to have told this reporter is about a series of meetings that took place during the Winter Olympics here. Now, in those meetings, crucially, the South Korean leader, President Moon Jae-in, has provided a path forward for no preconditions talks between the US and North Korea. So it kind of unfolded like this. They had a meeting, that is Moon and Pence, and President Moon is said to have told the US Vice President, how about when I meet the North Koreans, I say to them, we're not offering you any economic or diplomatic relief just for turning up to a meeting. And in return, though, we won't make denuclearization a precondition either. And so this way, both sides, I guess, can retain some face. Also, part of the plan, which it's according to this report, Mike Pence went along with, is that the South Koreans would kind of go first, try and push forward the dialogue, and then the US would come later. Now, he obviously subsequently has his meeting, Moon has his meeting with these North Koreans, including the sister of the North Korean leader, Kim Yo-jong. That's the meeting when the invitation comes for the South Korean leader to visit the North. After that, there's another meeting with Mike Pence while they're watching ice speed skating event at the Winter Olympics, and the two discuss the North Korean meeting. Moon says to Pence, well, I said to the North Koreans, how about you try and open dialogue with the United States? Now, what's happening here is that it seems Moon is finding a way forward that's acceptable for both sides. And I should stress, this is only for like an initial meeting. It doesn't mean there's going to be a whole series of talks necessarily. It's just to open a discussion. Naturally, though, this could all fall apart. You can imagine a scenario whereby Washington announces its latest round of sanctions, which it said it's going to do. In response, North Korea has a nuclear test or fires off a missile. Bang, we're back to square one. But that the Trump administration is even considering this is an enormous development.
I think we can describe that as striking a note of cautious optimism. Speaking earlier on a separate trip to Turkey, the US Secretary of State, America's top diplomat, Rex Tillerson, was more hesitant about the prospect of talks.
Well, as to the Vice President's comments about potentially having talks and whether it's the start of a diplomatic process, I think it's too early to judge. As we've said for some time, it's really up to the North Koreans to decide when they're ready to engage with us in a sincere way, a meaningful way. They know what has to be on the table for conversations. We've said for some time that I think it's important that we're going to need to have some discussions that precede any form of negotiation to determine whether the parties are in fact ready to engage in something that's meaningful in order for us to then put together the construct of a negotiation. So we'll just have to wait and see.
So we are talking about talks, but it could be progress. Let's talk in Seoul now to Dion Kim, who's visiting senior fellow at the Korean Peninsula Future Forum. Dion, thanks for joining us again here on Impact. Good to see you. And I just want to put to you Mike Pence's phrase is maximum pressure and engagement at the same time. How significant do you find those words, and engagement?
Right. Thanks for having me back, Philippa. So this Vice President Pence's comments, they're meaningful and they're good news first, but they're meaningful because it's coming from the White House this time. We've heard Secretary Tillerson make these remarks before, but what's notable is that it's now coming from the White House, and it's reaffirming the Trump administration's policy, North Korea policy of maximum pressure and engagement. And so far, we've only seen the maximum pressure part, and we've actually seen it also play out in real life at the Pyeongchang Olympics with Vice President Pence playing bad cop and President Moon playing good cop with the North Koreans. But it's still very early. I wouldn't say that this is a point in time where we can jump up with joy. It's going to be a very delicate process. First of all, the biggest question is, will North Korea be willing to come forward and engage in a preliminary discussion with the United States? And the other question, until now, the North has not been willing to do that. And the other question really is about just very practical and realistic sequencing issues. Do the North and the United States and the North Koreans, do they talk first? Does the Inter-Korean Summit happen first? And so there's a lot that Seoul and Washington need to iron out first before proceeding forward.
There is at least the idea of some movement. And when you talk about sequencing, it might be easier to have a North Korea, South Korea set of talks or initial talks first, mightn't it?
Sure, and that's, I would suspect that President Moon would want an Inter-Korean Summit first before U.S.-North Korea talks, just because the latter, U.S.-North Korea talks, it's unpredictable. You just don't know what's going to happen. And also President Moon, I suspect, would want to try and make the Inter-Korean Summit a springboard to U.S.-North Korea talks. But that's also a very unpredictable situation as well, because the North does not want to talk about the nuclear issue with the South. Pyongyang would not allow the South Korean delegation even mention the word nuclear or denuclearization in January's high-level talks that we saw last month. And so, this is going to be a very tricky and challenging situation for President Moon. How does he even try to bring up the issue? The South Korean public will definitely want him to bring home from Pyongyang some sort of commitment, at the least, a stated commitment or a sign that Pyongyang is willing to denuclearize, and that's going to be very tricky.
It's interesting, just standing back a bit, we seem to have gone from a moment where we were watching President Trump's Twitter feed and talk of fire and fury to a moment where the figure of the South Korean president, relatively new, President Moon, has become much more important.
Well, and, President Moon, he has staked his political future and his legacy on inter-Korean reconciliation. And President Moon has always wanted an early summit, a summit with a North Korean leader in his first year in office, actually, because his frustration has always been that the past two inter-Korean summits came too late in a presidential term to fully implement their agreements. And so you can see, you can imagine a scenario in which President Moon would also, not only does he have to, or he would want to achieve his own presidential agenda, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's also keeping in mind that keeping the North engaged with the South may help reduce tensions or keep tensions low for the time being, maybe even make it more difficult for Washington to seriously consider the military option, because the North is engaged with one of America's closest allies. And so, I would imagine that could be in the Moon administration's calculus. But again, the South Korean public and Korea watchers alike, they're going to want something more. They've seen this movie way too many times where the North is everything in the end, and the South Korea and Washington get nothing. And so it's a very, very difficult process going forward.
We have to leave it there, but you're right, Dion. We'll keep watching, and thank you very much for being with us again on Impact to pass what is actually happening. Thanks a lot.